How's it going, everybody? I'm Matthew. This is Lemora's Cards. We're doing something a little bit different today. If you've been following the channel, you'll know lately I've been doing some pretty popular shorts that have been talking about some of like the best cards in cEDH, like the best enchantments and the best creatures. I've been getting some comments that are a bit confused as to why they don't see some of the cards that they usually see in their games be really powerful. I think mostly from like the casual side of the format. So today I thought I would take a look at some of those and then some of just the big cards in casual Commander in general and talk about why they don't see so much play in cEDH or what makes it to where they're just not that strong in making the cut. If you enjoy this video, like, comment, subscribe. I don't know why I'm pointing in different directions. Let me know in the comments what you like about it, what you want to see from me. Merch, Patreon. Thank you to all my Patreon supporters. All the names are right here. Then yeah, let's get into it. So first up, Cultivate, and this kind of holds up the slot for a lot of the search for a land put into tap cards like Kodama's Reach, Rampant Growth, those sort of effects. Really, these are just too slow for cEDH. The best bits of ramp in cEDH are cards like Chrome Mox, Mana Vault, Soul Ring, Mana Crypt that are coming in and they generate you mana the turn you play them. Like, those are the really good ones. And at the very least, if you're going to be making a 2 or 3 mana investment, you should at least be able to turn colorless mana into colored mana like a Talisman might. Mana Dorks are kind of the closest to that, and that's usually spending 1 mana to get another mana next turn, and they have a lot more utility where attacking and blocking can be a little critical in some cEDH decks. Moving on to Counterspell. So this is one of the most popular bits of interaction in casual Commander, and it just doesn't quite make the cut nowadays in cEDH. Usually even Mana Drain doesn't end up in a lot of higher color decks because just holding up 2 mana can be a bit of an ask depending on the deck you're playing. And especially holding up blue can be really restrictive, like something like Delay where you can spend 1 in a blue. If you're in a 4 or 5 color deck, that's not as big of an ask. You don't have to fix your mana that much. Holding up 2 blue to hit anything is just not that relevant when you could be spending 1 blue or even less to play something like a Swan Song or a Force of Will to hit most of the big targets that you want to hit in this format. Chaos Warp. Mono red plays this a little bit, decks like Godo. But for the most part, it's just way too expensive to interact in cEDH when you have, 1 mana spells like Chain of Vapor, Swords of Plowshares, things like that. Most of the time when you get rid of something in cEDH, you don't need it gone forever. Something like a bounce spell is all it takes because you just have to get rid of the thing you don't want there and then just win. So you don't really need to make sure something's gone for like 4 or 5 turns a lot of the time. And yeah, this is just not really that efficient of removal, and you're only going to see it in decks that are like really desperate. Boros Charm, Heroic Intervention. These are pretty similar cards. Heroic Intervention does see a bit more play because it has a bit more flexibility, and the hexproof aspect of it is pretty relevant. Like I was mentioning, Swords to Plowshares and bounce spells that are really relevant where Boros Charm doesn't help you at all to protect from that. But really, in general, defending a board from a board wipe, which is what these cards get played for in casual Commander, just isn't as much of a play pattern you can expect to see in cEDH. And especially because the 2 most played board wipes you got to be scared of are Toxic Deluge and Cyclonic Rift, which these cards don't prevent at all. Toxic Deluge still kill your creatures if they're indestructible, and Cyclonic Rift doesn't care if they're hexproof, doesn't care if they're indestructible. They're going back to hand. Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots. These are really just representative of how winning in cEDH looks pretty different than casual Commander. In casual, getting like a big attack trigger based creature, just your big dude into play, and then giving it some protection and haste, that's pretty relevant to, be able to beat somebody down in like 3 turns with your commander. But that's just not usually how we're looking to win in cEDH. The protection could be nice, and there are some decks that might look to use effects like these, but just in general, equipment kind of struggles to be useful in cEDH. Getting in attacks consistently and quickly are just not as much of a relevant thing there, and that's mostly what these effects are for. Teferi's Protection. So this is kind of similar to Boros Charm and Heroic Intervention. You're not really looking to protect your board in this sort of way in cEDH that often. Teferi's Protection, if you had it, could be useful, but again, it's a 3 mana spell you have to hold up. Not a lot of decks can even afford to hold up 3 mana to interact. And it doesn't save you from some of the most popular win conditions, which is things like Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Consultation. Teferi's Protection doesn't care about that. You still lose. And then a lot of like infinite mana outlets, they can just go on top of you and kill you on your upkeep, draw their whole deck to the point where you can't do anything, and then it just doesn't help. It actually isn't going to help you win, and it's not even really going to help you prevent losing. Burgeoning Exploration. These do see play a little bit. Mostly in like low color decks, maybe like Sithis, Enchantress based things. Burgeoning especially can be really powerful. The cards can be awkward though because cEDH decks don't really want to make a lot of land drops typically. You don't want a hand that's really heavy on lands if you don't have Burgeoning or Exploration, and you don't want a hand that has Burgeoning or Exploration and isn't heavy on lands. So it can be really at odds with how we typically build the decks. Smothering Tithe is a big one that people think is a cEDH card, but it just doesn't make the cut in like 90% of decks. It's just a bit too expensive. For one, if it was like 3 mana, like Rhystic Study, I think it would be a completely different story. It's usually a lot easier to power out a big 3 mana thing on turn 1. So yeah, a card like Smothering Tithe, one, is very expensive for what it has. Pretty good to get those treasures on each turn on draw steps. But the problem can be for a lot of decks, it's a lot easier in this format to turn cards into mana. Like we mentioned, we have positive mana rocks, but turning mana into cards can be a little bit more difficult. So usually getting more cards solves a lot of your problems in cEDH, whereas getting more mana doesn't hurt. It's a tough investment, and the length of cEDH games also here. cEDH games tend to be long lengthwise, like 2 hours, like a casual game, but because the turn count is usually much lower, the amount of cards you can reasonably expect to draw off a Smothering Tithe without a wheel effect is a lot lower. The Leylines, these are a pretty interesting one. Some of these do see a little bit of play. Leyline of the Void can actually be pretty problematic for a lot of decks that look to use things like Underworld Breach, one of the most powerful win cons in the format. And Leyline of Anticipation is a really awesome card. Any of these are good to have out. It's just not consistent to rely on a card like these to show up in your opening hand when you're running a 100 card deck. Reliability and power is, what you're really going for in a lot of these decks, and these just aren't the kind of effects that really offer that. Propaganda and Ghostly Prison. So these are ones, again, big in like Pillow Fort style casual decks. Really good when the opponents have to fairly, fight you and attack you with their creatures. But like I said, over here in cEDH, we're mostly winning with combos or winning on the stack. Sometimes they'll help you take the pressure off your life total, but really they're just not effectively answering what people are doing. And a card like Rule of Law or Archon of Emeria is going to be way better at slowing down what your opponents are actually trying to do. Land tax. So this is one, again, sees play in a couple decks. It just doesn't get you a lot. You get card advantage, but you're not getting selection. A lot of times the power of card advantage is you get a lot of options. And when those options are what basic you're pulling out with land tax, it just isn't really giving you a lot to work with. Deck thinning isn't really that much of a thing that you should worry about a lot of the time. So it's just not an effect that's really that powerful in our format. Yeah, and there you have it. That's why some casual cards don't see play in cEDH. And yeah, as always, if you enjoyed it, like, comment, subscribe, let me know. Support me over on Patreon so you can get access to videos sooner. And make sure to check out my podcast. The next episode, I believe, should be sort of the opposite of this video, where Eric and I are going to be talking about the best cards in cEDH and why they're so good and why they see so much play and what makes them so good. We'll be going into a lot of detail on that over on the next episode of Learning cEDH. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. See you next time.